They say children should be seen and not heard. They say you'll understand when you're older. You're just a kid. But a kid swam for 3 hours on the open sea to save 18 lives and became an activist for refugees. A kid broke through barriers to keep migrant families together and delivered a message of hope.
Let us fight with love, faith, and courage so that our families will not be destroyed.
A kid was forced to kill in a brutal civil war and became a human rights activist, freeing other children from violence. A kid fought for girls' right to education, was shot in the head in retaliation, and won the Nobel Prize.
This award is not just for me. It is for those forgotten children who want education, who want peace, who want change.
And a kid spoke truth to power, inspiring a historic movement against climate change.
We kids shouldn't have to do this. I wish that the adults would take their responsibility and do this instead. But since no one's doing anything, we have to.
Kids are speaking up. Kids are demanding their rights. Kids are acting now for a better tomorrow. What will you do?
Good morning, heads of state and governments, ministers, excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I call to order Leaders' Dialogue 2 of the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, convened under the auspices of the General Assembly, SDG Summit on Accelerating the Achievement of the Sustainable Goals, Critical Entry Points. Now, let me take this opportunity to cordially welcome all of you to this Leaders' Dialogue, and I am honored to serve as your co-moderator together with His Excellency Carlos Alvarado Quesada, President of Costa Rica. Now, before we proceed, I would like to make some introductory remarks about the theme of our discussion this morning. We are gathered here today to discuss the transformative potential of the 2030 Agenda. But let me begin by addressing the concerning findings of the Global Sustainable Development Report. It reveals that despite our efforts, we are not making progress in fighting inequalities, climate change, biodiversity loss, nor the increasing amounts of waste from human activity. The report emphasizes that achieving the SDGs fundamentally requires decoupling economic growth from environmental degradation, whilst reducing social and gender inequalities in wealth, income, and access to opportunities. How can we achieve that goal? The SDGs need to become the guiding light in all public policy making. I can mention one good case study from Iceland concerning SDG number 5 on gender equality. Iceland has been in the forefront on most global indices on gender equality for the past 10 years. Why? Because we have changed the structures of society from the aspect of gender, implementing universal childcare, shared parental leave with a use it or lose it proportion for fathers and mothers, implementing gender budgeting, analyzing how public financing works differently for men and women, changing our priorities building on that analysis. Working with the private sector to increase transparency and try to close the gender pay gap. And now we all need to implement very concrete structural changes for the climate, because if we do not act now, it will have devastating consequences for the rest of the agenda. In order to fulfill our commitment to the Paris Agreement and reach our goal of carbon neutrality no later than 2040, we are implementing an ambitious climate action plan, prioritizing an energy shift in the transport system and increased carbon binding. We have been implementing green taxes and tax reductions to transform the economy into a climate-friendly economy. We are prioritizing research and innovation concerning climate and building partnerships with the private sector in support of business development for green and sustainable solutions. We are implementing new indicators on well-being, environment, and economy in our whole budget system to ensure that our measurements do not only focus on GDP, but measure all the things that really matter, not least the environmental factors. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2030 Agenda will not be achieved without the full and inclusive partnerships between governments, the private sector, civil society, and academia. To reach the SDGs, we need to make structural changes in our societies and economies, and we need to act quickly and firmly. The SDGs are our guiding light to fight the climate crisis and create, at the same time, a more just and a more sustainable society for the coming generations. Thank you very much. And now I invite my co-moderator, the President of Costa Rica, to make his opening remarks.
Thank you, Prime Minister. It's a pleasure to moderate this panel with you. Before I start, I would like to point out our common ground as small, disarmed countries with great ambition regarding the role of peace in sustainable development. Also, thank the organization of this panel and welcome your participation here today. 4 years ago, we made a commitment to leave no one behind, to ensure justice, inclusive societies, and to continue to tackle the extreme inequality that persists within countries, as well as among countries. This will not be possible unless we accelerate the achievement of SDGs. The Global Sustainable Development Report presented today stresses the need to reinforce our strategies and means towards the fulfillment of the SDGs. As such, I am pleased to share with you Costa Rica's institutional and political framework for implementation of the 2030 Agenda, guided by an inclusive and evidence-based process. In 2016, we signed a national pact with different stakeholders, including government, labor unions, private sector, academia, civil society, local governments, and the Ombudsman's Office, guided by the National SDG Secretariat, which identified 3 critical entry points to direct national implementation and to foster the interlinkages and reduce trade-offs among the SDGs. To tackle poverty and inequality, our first entry point, we refer to a multidimensional poverty index, which is an integrated database. This has been used to tailor the necessary policies to eliminate poverty, inequality, in an interrogative approach. Second, we identified the need for achieving sustainable cities and communities in order to revert Costa Rica's structural gaps in urban and territorial planning. Finally, sustainable production and consumption has also been highlighted to ensure our transition to sustainable development. We need to harness the opportunities of the fourth industrial revolution and implement technological improvement for better waste treatment and transformation of production systems. On a personal note, 5 years ago, the first time I addressed a forum like this was about SDGs. And at the time, 5 years ago, I remember I thought to myself, 17 points in an agenda might be complex. Now, being president, working with different ministries, with budgets, with different planning, and with the complex reality we face, I am sure it's the best way to change realities for the people in an integrated way. Because I've seen it happen. So my encouragement today is for us to commit on accelerating the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, as it is the main objective that we have drawn for ourselves here this day. So, distinguished participants, before calling on the first speaker on the list, may I remind delegations that statements are limited to 3 minutes. To assist speakers in managing their time, speech timer will be projected on the screen. The clock on the speech timer will start blinking red to indicate that the speaker has 1 minute left to conclude his or her statement. In this regard, delegations are encouraged to submit longer versions of their statement to the Secretariat for posting on the PaperSmart portal. I appeal to all delegations to strictly observe the time limits in order to allow all inscribed speakers to deliver their statements. So now I give the floor to His Excellency Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, most merciful, most compassionate, Your Excellencies, Head of Presidents, it gives me pleasure to be in your midst today to exchange viewpoints after 4 years of adopting the United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development, which is considered among the great achievements for international cooperation and development, and among the basic basis for our work. There is no need that the last years has witnessed achievements and options that helped develop development, but the road is still too long in order to achieve what we have agreed before. The economic, social, humanitarian, political, and security present challenges are intertwined. This confirms once day after day that our fate is common, and the need to work together and to build a partnership at all levels. On that basis, our effort to accelerate the achievement SDGs needs to work in the following basis. First, to build on the political commitment by all countries and all regional and international organizations concerning this very important and vital issue, and to mobilize our effort to work together seriously in order to achieve our objective according to the national priorities of states. Second, to double our effort to provide the necessary financing to provide the appropriate environment in accordance with our aspiration and with the volume of challenges, without political conditions or without imposing any certain methods for sustainable development. Third, we have to accelerate the implementation of all options and strategies, especially increasing the ability of national institutions and supporting the human capability and to achieve a cooperation among all points of sustainable development. Egypt has put sustainable development among its national priorities. It was among the countries that have adopted national plans that participate in the implementation of 2030 agenda, and also we have national strategies for Egypt 2030, and it's based on ambitious program, economic program that has achieved many positive results on the economic and social front, and this has increased the rights of Egyptians. Also, we have to provide, to enable men and youth to work, especially in the field of health, and we have to reinforce the linkage between our technological capabilities and to improve our economic and social conditions. This is a basic condition to achieve investment in human being. And we understand also the environmental challenges, especially the climate change. We have agreed on certain objectives within the United Nations. Hence, our African continent has realized the importance of Egypt through 2063 agenda, and the international effort can help not only in achieving solidarity, but within the framework of our common faith. And in light of the positive effects of the efforts in Africa on international economy and to achieve our vision for sustainable development, especially in Africa. Thank you.
And I call upon His Excellency Milo Đukanović, President of Montenegro. And I remind the delegations, please, to address your statement in 3 minutes. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear co-moderators, it is a pleasure for me to participate in one of the Leaders' Dialogue on behalf of Montenegro. I perceive this forum not only as one of the opportunities to confirm political will to implement the defined goals, but also as an opportunity to share the practical experience. This is even more important since, according to the findings from the Secretary-General's report, the lack of insufficiently ambitious global response leads to the situation that the most vulnerable categories of population and countries still feel the most severe consequences of the slow implementation of the 2030 Agenda. I am convinced that we have to plan our future activities very carefully so that they include continuous engagement of all stakeholders in generating new ideas for achieving the vision of Sustainable Development Goals. 5 key elements of the agenda continuously and unfailingly encourage establishment of innovative, integrative approaches and critical position towards the challenges of our time. Being aware of the transformative nature of the agenda, we in Montenegro have been committed to mutually harmonized, integrated long-term sustainable development measures. I would like to use this opportunity to indicate to several entry points that serve as the basis for the integrative nature of the sustainable development policy in Montenegro, and that particularly contribute to the acceleration of achievement of our SDGs. Within the current reform of the system of governance for sustainable development, we are strengthening the existing functions of the National Sustainable Development Council and establishing central, horizontally positioned organizational unit within the public administration system to implement the strategy. The optimum effects are best achieved if activities of numerous stakeholders on the national and local level are aligned. In terms of spillover of both positive and negative effects of national responses, Montenegro has a negligible potential in the global context. In relation to this, and in line with the approach of leaving no one behind, we think that optimum mechanisms for exchange of reliable data about national achievements have to be established, so that the global reports can reflect the objective situation as much as possible. I would therefore like to call for the strengthening of mechanisms for exchange of information between the United Nations system and official national institutions. Accelerating the achievement of sustainable development goals has to be based on the integrated nature of the national sustainable development policy. That is why Montenegro has departed from sectorial approach and based its national sustainable development policy on the horizontal multi-sectorial strategic planning. Interlinkages between at least 5 of the Sustainable Development Goals have been achieved in the process of definition of individual strategic sustainable development measures. This has strengthened the synergy effects of the concerted implementation of sustainable development targets. Particular importance has been attached to the integrative nature of the measures aimed at the strengthening of Montenegrin strategic commitment to the establishment of the optimum national development model based on the sustainable use of the overall national resources. This has resulted in significant positive breakthroughs that we have already recorded within the process of development of the first regular report on the implementation of the national strategy. Unfortunately, due to the time constraints, I cannot go into details, but I want to underline at least the progress in economic growth, increase of the share of energy from renewable resources, continuous monitoring of water and forest resources, monitoring of poverty risks, education quality, etc. Within its capacities, Montenegro will continue providing maximum support to the transformation of development based on acceleration of the achievement of sustainable development goals and targets. Thank you.
Your Excellency, I now give the floor to His Excellency Julius Maada Bio, President of the Republic of Sierra Leone.
Colleague heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, the facts from the voluntary review at the high-level political forum this year revealed that global poverty figures have stayed around 1 billion, with sub-Saharan Africa accounting for the largest share. At a global level, We must intensify our efforts to achieve the SDGs. Sierra Leone's medium-term national development aligns with the 2030 Agenda for SDGs. We have prioritized SDG 4, which is quality education for all, and SDG 16, justice and strong institutions, because we see them as accelerators for national development. We have invested 21% of national budget into our free quality education program. We are focused on access, quality, retention, completion initiatives for at least 2 million children, irrespective of gender, ability, or socioeconomic status or region. In response to the sharp decline in external financing to LDCs, we have had to undertake urgent institutional and policy reforms to increase domestic revenue, rationalize expenditure, and clamp down on corruption. We are also saving millions of dollars by reducing fiscal risk in public spending. We have strengthened our civil registration and vital statistics systems and introduced a national digital identification platform. This will enhance financial inclusion and access to credit, and it will also serve policy-making and governance imperatives. We are making business-friendly reforms to expand private capital investment. We have earned the renewed confidence of our development partners, including the IMF. Certainly, ladies and gentlemen, we seek more cooperation in fighting illicit financial flows and other threats to economic development. We also call on partners to align their development assistance with priorities that we have set out clearly in our medium-term national development plan. Sierra Leone will keep working towards its SDGs targets. We are convinced that multilateralism holds the great promise for us all in spite of the challenges. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I thank the President of the Republic of Sierra Leone, and now give the floor to His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, President and Commander-in-Chief of the Defense Forces of the Republic of Kenya.
Thank you, Chairperson, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. The Sustainable Development Agenda frames important goals that countries can use to prioritize development actions and benchmark themselves. And indeed, we are happy to join you today to discuss strategies that Kenya is implementing to accelerate progress towards our SDGs. First, Kenya has aligned the SDGs with its national development and implementation instruments. Kenya's Blueprint for Social Economic Development, our Vision 2030, envisions a society in which no one is left behind. It provides the long-term aspirations towards a thriving middle-income country and resonates strongly with the SDGs. The 5-year medium-term plan translates the Vision 2030 into systemized priority action programs. By 2015, when the SDGs were launched, Kenya had achieved free and universal primary education. My administration has taken these gains further by guaranteeing free secondary education for all day scholars, and we have seen a 100% transition from primary to secondary school education. To enhance equal opportunity for girls, we have also established a re-entry policy to allow girls who drop out of school following pregnancy. Further, we have made provisions for free sanitary towels to all girls in public schools. All these measures are meant to boost girls' access to education. Kenya's children enjoy an average of 10.7 years of schooling, the highest in the region, and in order to improve education quality and close the gap between schooling years and learning outcomes, my administration has commenced on the digital registration for all primary school and secondary school students in the National Education Management Information System. Kenya's economic growth has been robust over the period 2010 to 2017, averaging around 5.9% annually, and we forecast growth over 6% in the medium term. The impact on poverty has been commensurately significant, with the number of people living under $1 per day reducing substantially from 46% of the total population in 2010 to 36% in 2017. Although these gains are encouraging, at 36%, this is not acceptable, and we remain committed to having a nation that envisions a people of prosperity. The second strategy towards accelerating implementation of the SDGs is domestication of their goals. The current Vision 2030, our 5-year medium-term plan, spells out 4 priority areas that are my administration's focus for social economic transformation, namely the Big 4 agenda. These include food and nutrition security, universal health coverage, affordable housing, and manufacturing. My administration's strategies towards universal health insurance coverage includes guaranteeing access for all persons to an essential health benefits package that prioritizes primary health care interventions, thereby reducing the household burden on costs of medicine and increasing the number of insured people, starting with the most vulnerable groups. The housing gap of 250,000 units annually falls proportionately on the lower segment of our market, and in order to enhance sustainable cities and communities, my administration is upgrading slum and informal settlements, not only through the provision of low-cost housing, but clean water and improved sanitation, construction, equipping, and staffing of health centers, construction of access roads and schools, and creating income-generating activity. About 50% of preventable diseases are related to lack of improved water and improved sanitation. And we are therefore investing heavily in the water sector through the construction of dams and water pans, promoting greater water harvesting, and raising infrastructure bonds to increase infrastructure for water and sanitation. Third, achieving the SDG not only requires strong partnerships, but international and locally, but across multiple stakeholders towards a collective action to create, share, and broker knowledge, and to exploit the opportunities provided by the interlinkages and indivisibility of the SDGs. A fundamental shift is expected in the development finance architecture. Improving the effectiveness, quality, and impact of development cooperation in this context will require inclusive partnerships, innovative approaches, and application and adaptation of international learned lessons at the country level. The 4 strategies: A, alignment and prioritization of focus areas; B, domestication of the SDGs; C, partnerships and collaborations among state and non-state actors; and D, community-level ownership, are seeing Kenya steadily progress towards the SDGs. Although Kenya's projectile is overall positive, sustained support from the international community and private sector is essential for Kenya's realization of the SDGs. In conclusion, I wish to highlight the opportunity of global knowledge sharing, capacity building, science, appropriate technology, and innovation are fundamental towards accelerating the achievements of Agenda 2030. Kenya is delighted to be a pilot country of the Global Pilot Program on Science, Technology, and Innovation Roadmaps for the SDGs, and we look forward to your collaboration and support with a view not only on hastening access, transfer, and diffusion of technology. We should also ensure that innovations and knowledge are treated as a global public good and disseminated quickly, effectively, and widely for the benefit of all. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the President of the Republic of Kenya, and I would like to appeal to all delegations to strictly observe the time limits in order to allow all inscribed speakers to deliver their statements. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Taneti Mamau, President, Head of Government, and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Immigration of the Republic of Kiribati.
Well, thank you, Moderator. In as far as the thematic issue is concerned, especially the accelerating the achievement of SDGs, the critical in 3 points. The government of Kiribati has noted the 2018 SDG progress report for Pacific Island countries. The major achievement has been the 100% achievements of the goal to conserve a minimum of 10% of coastal and marine areas by 2020, and that's related to SDG 14, which is life under sea, and certainly we don't want to live under that sea. And yet these achievements clearly underlines the importance of climate change as a major crisis in our country. And that also entailed our focused efforts to implement disaster resilience and climate change mitigation adaptation projects, which is a reflection in the project undertaken in climate change, disaster risk reduction in oceans and seas, totaling approximately 33 million Australian dollars from 2016 to 2019. Kiribati is also happy to report that we have also secured co-financing from Global Climate Fund, World Bank, ADB, and the government of Kiribati for 58 million Australian dollars for the South Tarawa water supply and sanitation project in 2018 to commence this year. Additionally, an 8.3 million water project for the outer islands has also been approved and earmarked for funding. My government is working very hard towards uplifting the achievement of the other SDG indicators, noting that reporting may not necessarily reflect the actual achievement on the ground. And Kiribati is strengthening data collection, capacity building, and monitoring to ensure 2019 outcomes for SDG reflect actual efforts. Various targeted efforts are underway to strengthen and accelerate our achievement for SDGs, driven by strengthening our planning and budgeting monitoring cycles for the 2020 to 2023 Kiribati Development Plan and Ministry strategic plans. We will also be streamlining our indicators to focus on linking governance and efficiency to finance and non-financial performance. For Kiribati, capacity building for improved reporting is fundamentally critical, and we seek to an update. Also on the post-2015 Samoa pathway actions, 118 and 119 on capacity building and institutional strengthening. I thank you.
I thank the President of the Republic of Kiribati and now give the floor to His Excellency, His Majesty, King Willem Alexander of the Netherlands. Please.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to speak here at the SDG Summit today. I'm representing the entire Kingdom of the Netherlands, both the Caribbean and the European parts. The scientists' conclusions are crystal clear. If we want to reach the goals we have set, we must adopt a truly transformative approach at a global scale. Let me mention 3 entry points that we, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, believe are crucial. The first is an economy that respects limits of our planet, a circular economy. Today, humanity consumes much more than the planet can supply. In the Netherlands, public and private partners have come together and worked out a roadmap to guide us towards achieving a 100% circular economy by 2050. But achievements at national level are not enough. We have to work on international value chains as well. Do we know where food, clothes, iPhones are produced? Where the materials come from? What are the working conditions for those who produce them? We must be inclusive and reach the people who are producing those goods. Mr. President, Madam President, this brings me to the second point. Everyone in the world needs to be able to exercise their rights. Today, 5.1 billion people are vulnerable because they lack access to justice. This is why Sierra Leone, Argentina, the elders, and the Netherlands have joined forces, committing ourselves to increasing access to justice at a global level. We encourage others to join us. A third critical entry point is women's rights. Across the world, women continue to face serious barriers to exercise their rights and developing their full potential. And the progress we have achieved in the past few decades, for example, on sexual health and reproductive rights, is under pressure. Let's treat women and girls as equals so they can help create the world we want to see in 2030. Madam and Mr. President, my statement ends with a call for inclusion. We should be open to the ideas and solutions proposed by young and old, by great powers and small island developing states, by business and local government. And we should not forget that the overall principle of this agenda is leaving no one behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Majesty. Tiene la palabra.
I now give the floor to His Excellence, Mr. Martín Vizcarra Cornejo, the President of the Republic of Peru. You have the floor, sir. Thank you, co-moderators. Ladies and gentlemen, 4 years ago, we agreed to a robust agenda for integrated development to achieve economic prosperity and to improve the life of individuals. To implement this, Peru has been making ambitious efforts directed towards achieving inclusive, competitive, and sustainable growth and development within solid, representative, and reliable institutions that make it possible to close social gaps and gaps within the infrastructure. These efforts are part of Peru's vision towards 2050, which will make it possible to speed up the implementation of the 2030 agenda in our country so as to achieve a dignified life for all people without leaving anyone behind. This vision, adopted by consensus, includes 5 areas: social, environmental, economic, the state, and public management. 2 priority actions by my government are focused on coping with climate change and corruption. As a highly vulnerable country to climate change and in accordance with the Paris Agreement and the 2030 Agenda, Peru has undertaken commitments based on a solid normative framework and a roadmap with 62 mitigation measures and 91 adaptation measures, which include the cross-cutting approaches for gender, culture, and the generations. I'm firmly involved in building a country which achieves sustainable development, responsible development that will benefit future generations. Achieving a modern state requires ensuring a just, inclusive, and society without corruption. At the national level, my government has undertaken a head-on struggle against this scourge, which has affected is of international scope. And together with Colombia, we have succeeded in having the states members of the United Nations next year to conclude a special General Assembly to combat corruption. And this is in accordance with Goal 16 of the 2030 Agenda. Peru will seek in that assembly that there be a political action-oriented declaration adopted to make it possible for new and effective forms to eradicate corruption be achieved in accordance with democratic governability, and that resources needed to achieve the full development of countries not be diverted. In conclusion, in the framework of action to accelerate the attainment of the SDGs and in accordance with the commitments expressed, Peru will formulate a national strategic plan directed towards improving policies and plans at all levels of government. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Presidente.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Floor to His Excellency Andrzej Duda, President of the Republic of Poland.
Szanowny Panie Przewodniczący.
Distinguished Mr. President, distinguished Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. 4 years ago today, at the United Nations Special Summit here in New York, I had the honor of expressing on behalf of the Republic of Poland my full political support for the then adopted Agenda for Sustainable Development. It took us 2 years of difficult negotiations to reach this goal. Allow me to take this opportunity and give you a few examples of how my country is implementing key tenets of the strategy that was drawn up at the time. I would like to stress with satisfaction that already last year, just 3 years after the adoption of Agenda 2030, Poland submitted its voluntary national review of the implementation of its provisions at national level, which testifies to our strong commitment to this momentous process. Moreover, in parallel to Agenda 2030, we have adopted a medium-term development strategy for the country, the Strategy for Responsible Development. Its objectives and targets remain compatible with the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN Agenda. In addition, in June 2017, Poland launched a partnership for the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals, which is a platform bringing together more than 120 representatives from different backgrounds, a particular expression of our cooperation in pursuit of the agenda's goals. Having applied econometric models, we have thus identified areas with the greatest impact, which could be accelerators for the effective implementation of the Agenda 2030 goals, and should serve as a point of reference for public policies. From Poland's point of view, these priority areas are poverty reduction, and ensuring sustainable development of cities and local communities, as well as improving the living standards of the whole society. It is equally important to ensure equality education, equal rights of men and women, and the promotion of an inclusive society by building at all levels effective and accountable institutions conducive to social inclusion. It is therefore no wonder that social policy, particularly family policy, has become a priority in our country. Referring to the subject of our debate, we can say that it is a major accelerator in achieving the first, fifth, and 10th goal of Agenda 2030. Wide-ranging assistance programs have restored the dignity to thousands of Polish families, especially those with many children and those from rural areas. And these are not mere words without any foundation in reality. For example, according to Eurostat data, in the last 2 years, Poland has recorded the lowest percentage ever of children at risk of poverty. While several years ago, our country was unfortunately one of the leading ones on this disgraceful list. This is a huge progress. Of course, our sensitivity is also directed towards climate issues. In order to counteract climate changes, which features extreme weather anomalies, Polish authorities at the central and local government level are taking actions to increase water resources available, to improve energy efficiency, reduce smog, develop a long-term strategy of circular economy, and encourage adequate use of resources, including marine resources. Appreciating the need to achieve climate neutrality, Poland consistently acts to increase afforestation on its territory and thus to step up the absorption of emissions by ecosystems. It is worth noting that by these means, the area of forests in Poland has increased by 50% compared to 1945. Much still remains to be done in this field. But given the package of history and geopolitical circumstances in which we find ourselves, a lot has been achieved in Poland. And speaking again the language of our meeting, we have launched specific accelerators in the achievement of goals 6, 7, 11, 12, 13, and 15 of Agenda 2030. In order to advance these positive changes, we invest in development of technology and in scientific research and create a business-friendly climate, improving legal and institutional environment for business. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all aware of the fact that although the United Nations and Security Council may actively engage in an intermediary in peacekeeping, the primary responsibility for its preservation lies with the countries concerned. According to the timeline of our agenda, there is only 4,018 days left for us to turn these ambitions and actions into success. We have the opportunity to make sure that growing numbers of people shall live in decent conditions in this world and enjoy prosperity and security. As president of a country where these values are particularly treasured, I appeal to everyone to intensify their efforts to implement Agenda 2030 even further, in a spirit of shared responsibility for the consequences of our actions and bearing in mind our own fate and that of future generations. If you want to make it, we must not waste time. Thank you very much.
Republic of Poland. I now give the floor to His Excellency Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Mr. President, Excellencies, St. Vincent and the Grenadines remains committed to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals as outlined in the 2030 Agenda and as prioritized in our National Economic and Social Development Plan 2013 to 2025. For us, the eradication of poverty, the need to foster more equal societies, ensuring food security and sustainably manage our planet's resources are not just noble goals in the abstract, but they're real. The recent events, the hurricane, which affected our sister island, the Bahamas, unequivocally illustrate that we do stand at the crossroads, and we can't be business as usual. Look, disasters await us. We just simply cannot stand askance from what is happening in the world around us. We must acknowledge that a special case for SIDS exists in view of our unique vulnerabilities. The traditional responses which we have had to the contemporary challenges of climate change and inequality and their developmental impacts have hindered progress in all areas. Indeed, the contemporary condition of the global political economy demands an international political recognition of small states' exceptionalism, which calls for practical policy attention, not as a species of discretionary action, but as part of the very rules-based architecture of a global partnership which prioritizes small island developing states and their sustainable development. In other words, you just can't treat it as a sideshow. It's a main event, and we have to put rules to it. It's as simple as that. If not, this world is not going to be a lovely place to live in. The economy and the finance sector as levers of change, very important to the transformation of SIDS. There is a growing unilateralist tendency by a handful of powerful states to weaponize trade and the banking and financial systems to buttress their quest for an ignoble hegemony. This must be resisted by all right-thinking states which properly ground their trade and banking in a rules-based architecture and predictable international law based on an inclusive global consensus. ODA remains crucial for the financing of the Sustainable Development Goals. You can jump high, you can jump low. Unless you meet your commitments if you're a developed country. Look, this is not a gift, you know. It's in your interest. It's in your real interest. If I'm living in my house and you bring a noxious substance onto my premises, you have to pay damages. There's injunctive relief. The similar situation in this global family, when you bring whatever you, as a price of your own development, you make me suffer. This is not a gift. This is something which is in your own interest and is an obligation. Excellencies, despite all the challenges, we remain hopeful. Unsustainable levels of debt continue to compromise us, our growth trajectory, and retard developmental gains. But there are solutions available, such as ECLAC's Debt for Climate Adaptation Swap Initiative, and this is an opportunity for all of us in SIDS, and I'm very happy to see that the Secretary General has endorsed this. The 2030 Agenda represents a visionary and proactive program. It's on paper. We have 1 decade left. We mustn't defer this dream, but we have to seize the window of opportunity for real transformation. And we got to leap. There's a development chasm. There's a development divide. If you take baby steps, you're going to fall metaphorically in the widening gorge. You can only take leaps and jump. And this is a great cause. And great causes have never been won by doubtful men and women. Thank you very much.
I thank the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and now give the floor to Mr. Koo Dong-yu, Director General of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations.
Dear chairpersons, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. The purpose of 2030 Agenda is summarized in 3 key words and 4 betters: transforming our world by better production, better nutrition, better environment, and a better life for the future. The Global Sustainable Development Report released just 2 weeks ago identified food system and nutrition patterns as one of the 6 entrance points for achieving structural transformation at the necessary scale and speed. I welcome this report and would like to offer the UN perspective on food system transformation. To leave no one behind, we must begin by addressing needs of more than 2 billion people: farmers, fishermen, pastoralists, indigenous people. More than 80% are small food producers and laborers. I'm a son of the rice growers. I know in this room, a lot of people are son or grandson, granddaughters of the farmers. We must channel resources to the world impoverished region to promote targeted poverty eradication, investment in value chains, paying attention to local food stamps such as legumes, roots, and tubers. Not always rice, wheat, corn, soybean, those big items. We know the people from the island, from different regions in Africa, in Pacific Asia, they not eat so much rice and wheat, bread, what we had, most majority in this world. We must also tackle the special challenge of tropical, because tropical countries compose the 113 out of 194 members of FAO. And dryland agriculture, where the impact of climate change are particularly devastating, while the technical improvement for sustainability, resilience, adaptation are most urgent. Because those world, a lot of people live in the north part. And we must increase food quality, quantity, and diversity through improving good practice of agronomy in order to increase farmers' income and welfare. The story of food system transformation only begins with a stronger political commitment. There's special locations, collective synergy, and holistic design across the food chain. In this regard, in this special location time, as a FODG, I really call on politicians, professionals, and the private sectors, and the farmers must work together, deliver together, and also offer the tailored assistance to the small and weak hand by big and strong hand, by hand in hand, which matchmaking partnership among the public, private, and NGOs. Finally, I would ask you to, our fight against rural poverty and inadequate must include improved access to education, health, broadband for digitalizing farmers and farming. For that, let's do it together, hand-in-hand initiative, and also among the member countries, among all UN organizations across this planet need, which for our generations to come. Thank you. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
I thank the Director General of the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations for his statement, and now give the floor to Mrs. Paula Gioia of La Via Campesina.
Thank you very much, Madam and Mr. President, dear Excellencies. Thank you for this timely summit and for inviting us. I'm a beekeeper and represent La Via Campesina, the global peasant movement of more than 200 million people, comprising peasants, landless people, indigenous peoples, migrants and agricultural workers, rural women and rural youth. We are essential to achieve the goals of sustainable development. Therefore, many thanks for giving us this opportunity to share them here today with you. We need to acknowledge the peasant solutions and mainstream them. Peasant-led agroecology and sustainable peasant farming offer concrete pathways to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. To achieve zero hunger, food production must be based on agroecology and food sovereignty, embracing small-scale food producers. Peasant agroecology combines centuries of knowledge and experience with scientific and ecological principles to develop vibrant local food systems that can address poverty and marginalization. It promotes healthy and culturally appropriated nutritional food, enhances biodiversity, responding to the climate crisis effects. Excellencies, peasants are primary agents of change, yet we are often marginalized and dispossessed of our fundamental rights, such as land, water, and seeds. It is therefore essential to promote, to use, and to apply the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas. Countless reports from UN agencies, as well as the recently launched UN Decade of Family Farming, all recognize smallholder food producers as a pillar of strength in our society. We have been feeding the majority of the world's population for centuries and continue to do so. Excellencies, it is urgent now to put human rights and nature before profit. We, the peasants, have the immediate solutions that our children and youth are demanding on the streets today. We can help cooling the planet. For that, we need you, our government, to be ambitious, to truly represent us and to engage with us. Inclusive governance institutions, such as the Committee on World Food Security, should therefore be strengthened. We have the knowledge and the vision to contribute, shaping the necessary public policies and investments for a successful agroecological transformation. Let's globalize this struggle in order to globalize hope worldwide. I thank you.
I thank the representative of La Via Campesina for her statement. Now we have heard the last speaker in Leaders Dialogue 2 on accelerating the achievement of the Sustainable Goals, critical entry points. And I would like to thank all participants for their forward-looking and results-oriented interventions and for their cooperation and goodwill. And I think actually the key word here was accelerating, because to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs, we need concrete actions, and it was very inspirational to listen to all those speakers and the concrete actions their countries have been taking. One final point I would like to mention, because to be able to accelerate, we also need to have the people with us. And in Iceland, we actually made a poll to investigate how many of our people know the SDGs. Because if the SDGs are going to work as an important public policy tool, that matters. And I was actually pleasantly surprised to find out that 2/3 of Icelanders knew about SDGs. So that has actually helped us also to implement SDGs not only in government policy making, but also in the local communities, in businesses, in private sector. Because as my co-moderator, the president of Costa Rica, said here in his remarks, his opening remarks, the SDGs are such an important tool to change people realities. And if we have learned anything here today, it is the fact that our fate is common, but we have that tool to change people's realities. So thank you very much, and now I now give the floor to my fellow co-moderator here for his concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. How to generate national and regional inclusive economic growth in harmony with the environment and nature, as well as quality employment while reducing poverty and inequality and producing well-being for the heart, the mind, the soul, and the spirit. Well, that's a bit our goal, I believe. And these tools put there that in some cases are recognized by people. I congratulate Iceland on that broadened knowledge about the SDGs, but in some might not, but they may be known by the concrete specifics of their life is our task today. I believe that by listening to the different presentations on the floor, we have all enriched ourselves, and I congratulate that because it's a joint effort for humanity and for the people. And will is very important, the willingness for change and to make things happen. Leaders Dialogue number 3 on measures to leverage progress across the Sustainable Development Goals will begin momentarily in this chamber. I'm requested to tell you to please remain seated. And therefore, Leaders Dialogue number 2 is thus concluded. Thank you very much to everybody. May you all. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to third Leaders Dialogue Measures to Leverage Progress Across the Sustainable Development Goals. I am Sauli Niinistö, President of Finland, and my co-moderator is His Excellency Gaston Brown, Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda. Maybe we can start by me giving a couple of thoughts. As we well know, we are entering the decisive decade for the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Recent reports show the urgent need to accelerate action on all levels and by all stakeholders. Finland strongly supports the political declaration of SDG Summit, which we adopted yesterday. The Global Sustainable Development Report has identified 4 levers that can help us in achieving the necessary transformation. First, governance. Second, economy and finance. Thirdly, individual and collective action. And fourthly, science and technology. In this spirit, I wish to share some examples from Finland. Governments, we are determined to transform our country into a socially, economically, and ecologically sustainable society by 2030. One key objective in this vein is to make Finland carbon neutral by 2035. Second, we need a whole-of-society approach in implementing the 2030 Agenda. That means that not governments only, not parliaments only, but ordinary people have to understand and be with the process. Thirdly, governments need to base their planning and budgeting on sustainable development. In Finland, we have integrated sustainable development into the state budget and will continue to do so. When we have finance ministers on board, we will start seeing real change happening. In a way, money talks, but money can talk also in a positive way here. The Helsinki Principles adopted by 40 Minister of Finance means a systematic change in our thinking, in thinking of ministries of finance. That is to take notice in legislation, in taxation, in budgets, in investments, always the demands of climate and trying to stop the climate change. Fourthly, we also need to mobilize private sector investments. It is not only the public sector, the private sector has to find its responsibilities too. Fifth, we need to promote science, technology and innovation, including social innovation, as a key driver for sustainable development. Finland is very proud to host a growing number of UN innovation activities. To conclude, I want to mention that Finland currently holds the presidency of the European Union under the slogan Sustainable Europe, Sustainable Future. The common denominator of all EU action should be sustainability. And now, Your Excellency, I give you the floor, please.
I thank my distinguished co-moderator, the President of Finland, and I acknowledge Your Excellencies. Today, we are at the 4-year anniversary of the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, including the Sustainable Development Goals. Consequently, we must assess our progress to date across all SDGs and realign our strategies accordingly to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs by 2030. From the perspective of a small island development state, Antigua and Barbuda can report good news in a number of areas. We have been successful in decreasing our child mortality rate, eliminated mother-to-child HIV transmission, decreased teenage pregnancy, and everyone living in Antigua and Barbuda have access to good quality health care. We have improved quality education at all levels, including the establishment of a second chance adult learning program and the opening of the 4th landed campus of the University of the West Indies to facilitate increased university enrollment. We've also expanded the economy by an average of 5% per annum during the past 5 years. It created several thousand new jobs, thereby reducing unemployment and poverty. My government has successfully introduced new policies and incentives which have facilitated greater inclusion of minority groups to include persons with disabilities and Rastafari. We've increased gender equity, car, home, and business ownership for the masses to include the vulnerable. One such program is our Home Advancement Program for the poor and indigent, our HAPPY program, which is a housing grant program. In addition, we are transitioning from fossil fuel to alternate energy with the introduction of approximately 20 megs of solar and wind applications, representing approximately 15% of total energy output. These strides have been made despite our vulnerability, fiscal, and climate challenges, and our climate challenges are well known. Globally, however, the picture is very different. After the success of reducing poverty under the MDGs, we have seen an increase in the world's poor and a rise in inequality amongst nations. This is mostly driven by climate change and protectionist measures around the world. The reality is, most vulnerable countries have been left behind. Excellencies, we are almost 10 years away from achieving the SDGs. We're approaching the end of targets we have set, and if we are serious about ending extreme poverty, reducing inequality, providing sustainable energy for all, and urgently addressing all issues of the environment, we need to track progress across all SDGs. We need to figure out how to achieve the SDGs faster, but more importantly, to achieve them universally. We must take steps to ensure coordination and collaboration between and amongst countries towards the achievement of the SDGs. This type of partnership is essential in pursuit of achieving all the goals by 2030. Therefore, let us partner in aligning and realigning all global policies together and agree on a more equitable trading system and encourage investment opportunities that promote sustainable development globally, especially in small island states. We must also recognize the importance of official development assistance, concessional financing, and the creation of new bespoke financial instruments to include climate for debt swaps in achieving these goals. The likelihood of achieving the SDGs and measuring their progress becomes slimmer every year without the means of implementation. And this can't just be about governments. As my co-moderator included, the private sector and civil society are important players in financing the SDGs and holding us accountable for these goals. The SDGs are about everyone, everywhere, and certainly for everyone, everywhere. This SDG Summit represents an opportunity for collaborated frameworks and shared visions in defining the next 10 years. Let us redouble our efforts to achieve the SDGs by 2030. I thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Before I give the floor to speakers, may I remind delegations that statements are limited to 3 minutes. To assist speakers in managing the time, speech timer will be projected on the screen. The clock on the speech timer will start blinking red to indicate that the speaker has 1 minute left to conclude his or her statement. In this regard, delegations are encouraged to submit longer versions of their statements to the Secretariat for posting on the PaperSmart portal. Then I give the floor first to His Excellency Kasim Jomart Tokayev, President of the Republic of Kazakhstan.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the 2030 Agenda has given us a clearer roadmap towards a better future where all benefit equally from social, technological, and economic progress. Kazakhstan shares the international concern that the global community is behind on its targets. Thus, we need to take more resolute action in the coming decade to deliver the expected results. I am pleased to note that the political, economic, social, and environmental policies of my country are fully aligned with the 2030 Agenda. Despite the global economic turmoil, Kazakhstan's economy is expected to grow gradually. I am convinced that my country will be able to ensure its sustainable economic growth, create an inclusive society, develop a clean ecology, and build more efficient and accountable institutions. As part of this program, I introduced the concept of a state that listens to the needs and aspirations of its people. The aim is to facilitate a dialogue between the government and people and to make sure that public inputs into the formation of national policies will become more visible. The modernization of the educational system, a green and digital economy, and rapid infrastructural development are powerful driving forces for our economic prosperity and human progress. UNDP data show that 80% of the SDGs are integrated in our strategic government programs. In 2018, Kazakhstan, in close cooperation with UN agencies, introduced an institutional architecture to facilitate reaching the SDGs targets, including the establishment of a steering council. The first Forum on Sustainable Development Goals was a landmark event of the Astana Economic Forum held this summer. We have also presented our first voluntary national review on Kazakhstan's achievements, as well as the pending opportunities and challenges to be addressed over the next 10 years. The SDGs are obviously interconnected. They constitute a comprehensive picture of our planet. Thus, we cannot be satisfied with successes in individual categories or by countries only. Bearing that in mind, Kazakhstan is actively collaborating on implementing the SDGs at the regional and international levels. In this regard, I suggest the following. First, we should ensure that financial resources allocated for the purposes of the SDGs are spent in a reasonable way. In light of that, the 2030 Agenda requires special attention and support for the middle-income nations, like Kazakhstan. These countries, as we know, have a combined population of 5 billion. Second, the Islamic Organization for Food Security, established at the initiative of Kazakhstan's first president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, also helps to address issues of desertification, deforestation, erosion, salinity, as well as social safety. I hope that in the near future, all 57 member states will join this important initiative. Third, I propose to establish a UN inter-regional center in Kazakhstan for the SDGs. Our region has entered a new stage of its trade and economic engagement. We are bound together and destined to address and resolve our common threats and challenges collectively. This center may focus on accelerating the delivery of the SDGs, not only in Kazakhstan, but across the entire Central Asia and in Afghanistan. More cohesive cooperation and partnerships are crucial for advancing shared prosperity of the region. Today, we are building a new momentum to translate our commitments into actions. Each one of us is obliged morally to contribute more to secure peace, inclusive growth, and sustainable development for our future generations. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I just want to remind again about that 3 minutes. Then I will give the floor to His Excellency Pedro Sánchez Pérez Castellón, President of the Government of Spain. Please.
Thank you. Thank you. For Spain, the 2030 Agenda is a roadmap to cope with the current challenges and to make a contribution to global sustainable development for 3 reasons. First of all, because it's an agenda which enables us to face major challenges and in a collective and multilateral spirit. The challenges, for example, climate change and the transition to a carbon-free economy and the inclusion of social and the digital revolution and the combating disequality and discrimination. Secondly, because it's an agenda for peace and solidarity, past and solidarity among individuals, peoples, countries, and communities, young and old. It's also an agenda for favoring the sustainable development for all, with individuals and planet at the core. And lastly, it's an agenda, a mobilizing agenda for civil society and private society, academia and institutions, stakeholders, all of them, which are creating alliances and developing strategies in accordance with the efforts of the government of Spain, and with a participative approach, multi-level approach to gain efficiency, coherence, and impact. The 2030 Agenda is also in Spain a meeting place with a political will, the consensus of a parliament, and the commitment of our citizenship and the involvement of all levels of the government and the administration are leverage, is fundamental leverage to place the SDGs at the center of our future. Our plan for the implementation of 2030 identifies a set of actions called leverage policies and transformative measures in key dimensions with the potential to accelerate the overall progress to the SDGs. These are actions which can achieve coherence and synergy, connecting stakeholders, sectors, policy in a common integrated vision. The leverage policies here, we have adopted a national strategy to combat poverty, the strategic framework for climate and energy, the strategic plan for equality of opportunities and gender equality, the new Spanish urban agenda, and the steering plan for dignified labor, and the steering plan for cooperation and development. In the transforming measures, there is also the general budgets of the and incorporation of agenda for sustainable development and education, and the requirement for there to be an impact evaluation on all measures for the SDGs. We are now at a crucial moment to attain the 2030 SDGs, and time is limited. We don't have a planet B. The decade beginning will be one of action, commitment, and social. And there must be a new global social contract. And for this, you can count on Spain always, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Zoran Zaev, President of the Government of the Republic of North Macedonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor and pleasure to be here. It is of crucial importance this year to give recognition to the adoption of the implementation of the Universal and Transformative Agenda for Sustainable Development. We live in a world of changes so profound and rapid that no country can stand alone. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development recognizes this and provides a useful universal framework to strengthen collective action toward common goals and challenges. Shared prosperity and the fulfillment of our intergenerational responsibilities can only be achieved through collaborative partnership involving all countries and all stakeholders. Reaching the limits of our natural environment will have huge consequences for our economic structure, but also for human existence, and therefore it is our imperative to implement the Agenda 2030. In 2018, the government of the Republic of North Macedonia, through the National Council for Sustainable Development, reaffirmed the commitment to implement the United Nations Agenda 2030 and emphasized the importance of consistent integration of the Sustainable Development Goals into national strategic documents and local plans. For the period 2018-2020, the government identified 5 prioritized sustainable development goals: SDG 1, no poverty; quality education; decent work and economic growth; climate action; and peace and justice strong institution. This is based on the priority activities and measures defined in the government program and the 5 pillars of the current UNDF. Dear colleagues, the Sustainable Development Goals raise the ambitions higher, calling for further progress across a wider range of uses, but I will speak exclusively about the measures and reforms where we directly return the budget money to our citizens. We reduce inequality and help those who need financial help the most. In order to reduce inequality and to leave no one behind, I'm really pleased from the dedicated work from the Ministry of Labour and Social Policy due to the successful implementation of the social reforms. The outcome of the reforms is very significant. 3,000 households, or about 120,000 citizens, receive social assistance, higher by an average of 300% compared with 2016. Support for young people is one of our priorities as a country. Providing favorable conditions for upgrading, development and employment of young people is visible through our operational plan for employment. The government has set a record 17.9 million euros for this year. This is the highest amount ever, 3 times higher compared with 2014. It's a huge amount for the country of 2 million citizens. The Republic of North Macedonia is the only one non-European Union country that has introduced a young guarantee. For the first time, creation of the new jobs is planned together with the employers. All the measures are implemented in cooperation with all stakeholders and in accordance to the real needs at the local level in the country. This is why we conduct a reform for the dual education, in order to provide a greater flexibility and responsive vocational schools that will meet the needs of the employers and the labor market. The government of the North Macedonia established partnership with the business sector through the platform for public-private partnership with the biggest chambers of commerce. There is a lot of goals in front of us, and we are very successful and good example in the region. We, as a government, believe that investing in innovation and startups companies will keep the young people in the countries and reduce the economic migration in order to demonstrate our clear policy and willingness to follow young people's idea in developing their businesses. Together with the support of the World Bank, we have increased 7 times the portfolio of the Fund for Innovation and Technological Development with an amount of 39 million euros. In line with SDG 13, we are making an effort to implement measures that endorse green working position and implementation for energy efficiency in buildings and low carbon energy supply. The government is finishing up the first readiness to engage with the Green Climate Fund, and through the second readiness support, it will develop a country program and pipeline of projects to be submitted to the Green Climate Fund. Being aware that each country has primary responsibility for its own path to sustainable development, Republic of North Macedonia reaffirms its commitment to the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Public finance, both domestic and international, well-coordinated donors' assistance will play a vital role in providing essential services and public goods and will catalyze financial sources for SDG implementation. We should recall that the global goals are not just an additional plan for the world. They are the shared vision of a world, and they remain with reach if we embrace transformation and accelerate implementation. The Agenda 2030 is our promise to our children and the youth of today that they will achieve their full human potential and carry the torch of sustainable development for the future generation. It is in our determination to move forward. Everyone's contributions inspire hope. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Please.
Thank you, co-moderator. And before I acknowledge the next speaker, let me remind all representatives to respect the time stipulated, the 3 minutes, so that we could exhaust the list of speakers. I now give the floor to the distinguished Prime Minister of Tajikistan, and that is Mr. or Honorable Quihar Rasul Zoda. Thank you.
Co-moderators, ladies and gentlemen, exactly 4 years ago here in New York, the international community unanimously adopted a new agenda for sustainable development to 2030. This is a vital action program to achieve sustainable development in the interests of this and future generations. Tajikistan fully supports the global community's intention to work together to achieve sustainable development. And in that context, Tajikistan has adopted a national development strategy for the period to 2030 and a medium-term program to 2020. This sets out the institutional basis for achieving the SDGs in our country. In 2017, Tajikistan submitted its voluntary national review in the context of the high-level political forum on sustainable development. And last year, we also submitted a national review on the implementation of the SDGs. This report analyzes what has been achieved nationally in this regard. And currently, the government's efforts are being focused on improving the coordination to implement the SDGs within the context of national strategies, to improve the collection and quality of indicators and data, and also improving our monitoring and evaluation and reporting on the implementation and achievement of the SDGs, and also of making SDGs implemented at the local level. Now, to this end, we've prepared a new instruction of the National Development Council under the President. This is the main council. This council is the main mechanism for coordinating work on implementing the SDGs, the national strategy for the 2030, and also the medium-term development program to 2020. Now, the main feature of this new system is to ensure that all interested parties are involved in discussing the main areas of SDGs in the country. Furthermore, the Council is working with 13 working groups in different themes. Currently, work is underway on ensuring that the SDGs are implemented nationally and locally, and particularly in 4 key areas where we are having a 5-year review on the implementing implementation of the midterm plan to 2020. And also we are working on capacity building for these working groups in the Council under the President. I'd like to take this opportunity that we must improve our cooperation and partnership between all interested parties, the government, business and academic circles, and civil society. Global partnerships for sustainable development can play a key role in the timely and full implementation and achievement of the SDGs. The United Nations is called upon to play a key role in improving global partnership, and it's our hope that the United Nations will make additional efforts in order to establish effective partnerships for sustainable development. The international financial institutions and regional organizations also have an important role to play in this respect. I'd also like to add that the transition to a qualitatively new type of development requires that we cover all relevant problems. And in closing, I'd like to point out that addressing the goals and targets of sustainable development means that we have a clear mechanism for assessing and reviewing what has been achieved and the obstacles to achieving the SDGs. We are convinced that the high-level political forum on sustainable development will continue to play a key role in reviewing and evaluating progress at the global level. We look forward to further improvement in the work of this key United Nations mechanism for sustainable development. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished Prime Minister of the Republic of Tajikistan, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Leo Varadkar Taoiseach, Minister for Defence of Ireland.
Good Uaisle, Díomh. Excellencies, 100 years ago, Ireland declared her independence to the nations of the world. And in that time, we've become a prosperous and progressive society with a young, diverse and outward-looking population. We're very much committed to the multilateral system with the United Nations at its core and are determined to play our part. The 2030 Agenda, which Ireland co-facilitated with Kenya, guides and powers our approach. At home, we've prioritised areas of housing and homelessness, promoting sustainable consumption and production, achieving full gender equality, and also climate action. Our outlook is international, and by 2030, we've committed to contribute 0.7% of our GNI for official development assistance. And our international development policy seeks to help those countries most severely exposed to climate change. We want to reach the furthest behind first, and are working with the least developed countries and small island developing states, countries who've contributed the least to the problems the world faces, but are disproportionately impacted by their consequences. Over the course of more than 60 years, as a member of the United Nations, we've sought to match our words with actions, working in areas such as peacekeeping, disarmament, sustainable development, human rights and humanitarian assistance. We're guided by a spirit of independence, empathy and partnership. And today, we continue to be guided by a spirit of partnership and a commitment to multilateralism. We're determined to meet our global responsibilities, as we did when leading the SDG negotiations, and as we will do if elected to the Security Council next year. Thank you very much. Gurmíl Mágat.
I thank the Minister for Defence of Ireland for his statement, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Andrew Holness, Prime Minister of Jamaica.
Excellencies, the Global Sustainable Development Report, Levers of Transformation, Governance, Economy and Finance, Individual and Collective Action, and Science and Technology are intrinsic to Jamaica's development efforts. The principles of good governance and accountability have been institutionalized in our public service. Additionally, we have revised our fiscal policies, social protection systems, financial sector regulations, and trade policies to ensure that they are in line with new realities. We are faced, however, with the challenge of recurrent debt. But with bipartisan partnership and citizenship commitment, we have lowered our debt to GDP ratio by over 40%. It is worthy to note that Jamaica is the world's only example of a small country that has attained such a significant reduction in public debt so quickly without debt relief, forgiveness, or bilateral debt support. Notwithstanding this achievement, as a small island developing state, we remain extremely vulnerable to external shocks, particularly natural disasters, which could severely erode these gains in a matter of a few hours. My government is therefore committed to the implementation of policies to protect the poorest and most vulnerable, evidenced by increased budgetary allocations to social protection programs and initiatives. We acknowledge the tremendous value of science and technology to the attainment of our development goals. We have increased investment in these areas, and we are also partnering with universities in research and development for innovation. Our own University of the West Indies has been integral to the findings of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report of November 2018. Jamaica welcomes partnerships at the national, regional, and global levels. An excellent example of the socialization of wealth was a recent public offering of a renewable energy company. It broadens ownership of the Jamaican economy while generating well-needed financing for addressing multiple SDGs, particularly inequality, climate action, and partnership. In keeping with the commitment to expand economic opportunity for all, we have increased access to financing for micro, small, and medium enterprises through a program managed by the Development Bank of Jamaica. These are but a few of the concrete steps we are taking towards development. However, access to financing remains a challenge, particularly in the context of our classification as an upper middle income country. The sustainability of our efforts, therefore, requires adequate financing to fully attain the SDGs. This challenge poses a real threat to the hard-won gains generated by our responsible stewardship of the development process. I therefore urge development partners to redouble their efforts and contribute resources for the delivery of the 2030 Agenda. We also encourage UN member states and the UN development system to continue fostering an enabling environment for meaningful and durable partnerships for the benefit of all. No one should be left behind. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished Prime Minister of Jamaica for his statement, and I now turn over proceedings to my co-moderator.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Mrs. Vera Songwe, Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission of Africa. She is speaking on behalf of the 5 United Nations regional commissions.
Thank you, Excellencies. The Global Sustainable Development Report talks about the levels of transformation that can help us to achieve the SDGs in the decade that is left. Across the globe, because the SDGs are global SDGs, there are a number of issues that collectively hold us to task and bind us. And I think one of the big messages of the GSDR is the interdependence of some of the SDG goals. My task today is to talk about this interdependence, particularly as it appeals and talks to us from the GSDR across our geographies as both ECLAC, ESCAP, ESCOA, ECA, and ECA. These are the 5 regional economic commissions for whom I speak today. Let me start with the first one, which is essentially resource mobilization. Domestic resource mobilization, of course, is the most important, part of achieving the SDGs. For us to achieve the SDGs, whether we talk about South Asia, Latin America, Africa, or East Asia, many of the countries will still require a substantial amount of resources to ensure that all their populations have access to the services that are needed, social services, infrastructure services, and of course, digital technology. One of the things that all of us are doing collectively is working on issues of domestic resource mobilization, but it also includes our sisters and our brothers in Europe, because as we talk about domestic resource mobilization in the South, we need our brothers and sisters in the global North to ensure that issues of illicit financial flows can be arrested. In that case, ensuring that the developing countries continue to keep the resources that they need desperately to improve girls' education, maternal mortality, and the infrastructure that is needed. Collectively, as the Regional Economic Commissions, we are working with the European Union and all of our other partners to look at issues of stolen asset recovery, tax havens, and to see whether we can, as the report talks about them, finance our SDGs better, faster, and in a more equitable fashion. In Latin America, for example, the average tax to GDP ratio is 18%, but we have 6% of that is lost to illicit financial flows. In Africa, we have about $50 to $90 billion that are estimated lost to illicit financial flows. In Bangladesh, we know that we have problems of illicit financial flows. This is a continental and a global problem. The second issue, of course, is youth. We have youth across the continent and across the globe. We have them struggling for different reasons and different purposes, but we know that with digital technology, we can redirect our youth and give them purpose. And I think that one of the levers of transformation that is spoken about in the GSDR is how we can put the youth across the globe to ensuring that they can help us achieve the SDG targets. In Latin America, we have passed the youth dividend. In Africa, we are still getting to the youth dividend. But in either case, we need to create jobs to ensure that this youth that we all talk about can actually be proud and get decent jobs. We are working particularly with our sisters in the ECE, in the European Commission, to set up standards across for decent work. ILO has just produced a new report with DESER and the rest of the UN to ensure that this works well. The third issue that we want to talk about is gender. In Europe, women make on average about 15% less than men. So there is an inequality and a gender issue. In Africa, most women do not have access to land, even though 80% of the land is worked on by the women. In East Asia, women do not make the same salaries and do not sit on boards like men. So the issue of gender equality, the issue of ensuring that when women go to work, they actually have maternal care so that they can go to work are important issues across the globe. We know that if we can improve on the gender SDG goal, we improve on a lot of them. And therefore, again, as a transformation device, if we wanted to pick one SDG that we should work on, as a woman, I would say that we should work on the SDG that works towards gender equality. And across the regional commissions, we are working on that. And finally, digital technology. Digital technology can be an amazing levelizer for all of us, but it can also be a huge divider. Inequality is rising in many of our countries. And as the regional commissions, we are working to close that gap using digital technology. And we hope that policymakers here today will work towards making sure that digital technology is accessible, particularly to the youth and to the women. Once again, thank you for your attention.
I thank the Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa for her statement. And now I give the floor to my co-moderator, please.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Ms. Ann Keynes, Executive Vice Chairman of MasterCard, representing the major group for business and industry.
Your Excellencies and distinguished delegates, I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about what the private sector can do for the Sustainability Development Goals. We can bring two things. We can bring our technology and expertise because we need to innovate to survive. And we can bring sustainable growth through social impact. None of us can do well in a failing world, and so the business community has to adapt its business models to fit this agenda. And how do we actually do that? From a MasterCard perspective, since 2015, we committed to bringing 500 million extra people into the financial system. And we're on the cusp of achieving that right now through deploying biometrics, through deploying chip technology, through deploying mobile. And we have done this with the help of governments around the world in places like South Africa, Egypt, Mexico, India, and the UK. We know that education is important, and that's why we've been working with pay-as-you-go products such as Cooper in Uganda, with the Ministry of Education and with UNICEF to allow people to pay for their children's education. And furthermore, we've worked with private sector partners such as Unilever, digitizing supply chains so that small shopkeepers can get access to financing. No one country can do this alone in the interconnected world. We need to work together to build the cities of the future, not where the poor drive to work, but where everyone uses public transport through things like interconnected, contactless technology. And we need to cooperate. And to echo what Vera has just said, we need to engage the whole human race, not just half the people. And so, as the co-chair of the Global 30% Club and chair of Financial Alliance for Women, I urge you, bring women to the table. The gender equality goal is the key to unlocking economic prosperity and inclusion for all. Thank you.
I thank the Executive Vice Chairman of MasterCard for her statement. Excellencies, we have heard the last speaker in Leaders Dialogue 3 on measures to leverage progress across the Sustainable Development Goals. I would like to thank all participants for their forward-looking and results-oriented interventions and for their cooperation and goodwill. In fact, it is clear from the statements of the public and private sector leaders that there is full commitment to achieve the SDGs by 2030. It is therefore important that we support this commitment with strong implementation and redouble our collective efforts in achieving the SDGs by 2030. And certainly it was a pleasure co-moderating with the distinguished President of Finland, and I now turn over the proceedings to him for final remarks.
Thank you. A moment ago, we heard Prime Minister of Iceland telling that they had asked their people how many are somehow familiar with the SDG achievements. This has a lot to do with the mindset of ordinary people, which is, in my opinion, one of the most important elements. For instance, if those who have welfare understand that they are doing even better if there is no malaise, no bad feeling nearby. This works with individuals, but also on a larger scale between nations. Climate change is a huge challenge. Mindset of ordinary people is very important in that too, because the more people understand that we are endangered, the more the governments, the parliaments are acting, if they are pushed, or at least their activities are largely accepted by people. Thirdly, we heard Spanish Prime Minister adding to list that we are also working for peace. That is maybe the most important thing for sustainable future. I want to thank you all for a very good discussion. Thank you. And now we have concluded the Leaders' Dialogue 3. Leaders' Dialogue 4 on localizing the Sustainable Development Goals will be held momentarily in this chamber. Please remain seated. Thank you.
My name is Jillian Mercado. I am a model and an activist, and I also have muscular dystrophy. Having a disability, I've accepted it, so it doesn't stop me from doing anything. My electric wheelchair are my legs. And living in a city like New York, I can catch the bus, the train, or a taxi now and get to anywhere I need to go. I am here at the UN to talk about something that's very, very important to me, which is women and girls who have disabilities. It's an honor and a privilege too, and show people that it's okay to be yourself and still do what you love.
In this hall, most of the international treaties and conventions have been adopted. Among them, CRPD. This is the largest human rights treaty ever. 177 states subscribe to it.
I think that it's very important, and everybody wants basic human rights.
This is our main goal.
Yeah.
To include people with disabilities in the implementation of
In the conversation. Nobody knows about disabilities as well as we do. So having these conferences and these conventions are crucially important to have a better world. Life is extremely beautiful, and we should live it to its full potential.
That is great. Can I borrow it for the conference?
Yes.
I'm about to meet the Secretary General, and we are going to talk about super important issues. So come with me. How is the UN promoting full inclusion for people with disabilities?
Well, first of all, to raise awareness, to put it in the agenda. Second, to actively promote the adoption of laws. And then to integrate these questions in the Sustainable Development Goals. The convention was a landmark moment, and every person with disability needs to make sure that they have access to full education, access to social protection, access to decent jobs.
And also it's really important, at least for me, to talk about women and girls who have disability and how important that is. So I just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
We need to make sure that women are not double victims. First, because being women,
Right.
they are victims of discrimination, and second, because being women with disability,
Right.
they are double victims of discrimination. So it is clear that this is a fundamental priority for us. In our relations with member states, to be absolutely sure that in their national plans of implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, they take fully into account the rights of people with disability.
I'm so glad that, that I'm part of this, especially me myself having a disability. Sometimes we feel like we're left out. And, at the end of the day, we're all humans and we deserve to have equal rights.
We cannot afford to lose the contribution of 1 billion people to the development of the world.
If there's a message I want to say out there is to be vocal, talk. We're in a beautiful age of social media, and I think it's very important that if you have conversation, next thing you know it, you'll be at the UN talking about this.
Heads of state and government, ministers, excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I call to order Leaders Dialogue 4 on the high-level political forum on sustainable development convened under the auspices of the General Assembly, the SDG Summit, on localizing the Sustainable Development Goals. Let me take this opportunity to cordially welcome all of you to this Leaders Dialogue. I am honored to serve as your co-moderator, together with Her Excellency Sheikh Hasina, Prime Minister of Bangladesh. And by the way, I am Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic, the President of Croatia. Before we proceed, I would like to make some introductory remarks about the theme of our discussion. So again, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor and great pleasure to co-moderate together with Her Excellency Madam Sheikh Hasina, Prime Minister of Bangladesh, the fourth Leaders Dialogue, localizing the Sustainable Development Goals. It goes without saying that balanced regional development and territorial cohesion are the common goals for most of our countries. Indeed, the 2030 Agenda calls for an inclusive and localized approach to the SDGs, leading at the same time to the countries to achieve the goals and targets in the way that is best adapted to their national interests. Having in mind the role that local and regional governments play in this process, let me briefly refer to the situation in my own country, Croatia. The regional development policy in Croatia is characterized by systematic collaboration between the central government and units of local and regional self-government, municipalities, towns, and counties, aimed at supporting job creation, competitiveness, economic growth, increase in the quality of life, and sustainable balanced development of all areas in Croatia. I must say that Croatia is one of those countries that is developing at different speeds, depending on the region where you live in, as because of the shape of our country, there are many rural areas and many border areas. Croatia has been committed to functional and fiscal decentralization, and it's been one of the primary points of my policy. Over the last 2 years, 1,224 infrastructural projects with a total value of 49.3 million were implemented in local and regional self-government units in Croatia, which are less developed and specific. This was done mostly using the Sustainable Development of Local Communities program or by adopting new legislation such as the Islands Act, which entered into force at the beginning of 2019. And by the way, we have about 1,246 islands and only a portion of them inhabitable. We are promoting the development of so-called smart islands, which ensures the use of smart technologies, the use of renewable energy, energy efficiency, introduction of sustainable island mobility, smart management of water resources, and introduction of the circular economy, all of which contributes to equal living conditions on the islands and the mainland. Taking into account the integrated approach to sustainable development, Croatia is preparing the 2030 National Development Strategy to be adopted in the first half of next year. As a key strategic document, this strategy shall form the foundation for shaping and implementing all public policies at the national level and subnational level based on sustainable development goals of the 2030 Agenda. An additional challenge is to raise awareness about the 2030 Agenda at all levels and among all stakeholders. Yesterday, in my speech before the General Assembly, I spoke about real people and real action which inspires. I mentioned environmental action of the Croatian island of Zlatin. It is a small island inhabited by around 300 people with hearts and minds dedicated to the preservation of their environment and their home. I'm sure that we would have many more projects, and that we do have many more projects like that in Croatia that we do not know of. But with education of the SDGs, I believe that not only the NGOs, but the local communities, and as we have seen, increasingly children in elementary and high schools, whom we have to encourage to do so, are getting actively involved in the public life, not only in the preservation of environment, but also in the implementation of the other aspects of the SDGs. And I do believe that we have to continue in that vein. I will not speak any further about the environmental project that I talked about, Take a Break from Plastics. I just want to say that when speaking here at the UN Assembly, I do not take it as a bureaucratic action of reporting what a certain country has done or needs to do. For me, it's about giving voice to the people and always giving these positive examples that can inspire people, not just in my country, but around the world as well. With this, I would like to invite you to exchange views about the greatest challenges governments and communities are facing in implementing the SDGs and how the progress can be accelerated, with a special focus on good examples of policy coherence and cooperation across different levels of government, but I would also say of the private sector and of the NGO community as well. We're looking forward to hearing about good practices and experiences from the local level, and moreover, how they can be scaled up. So thank you very much, and let me now invite my co-moderator, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, to make some opening remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Excellency. Ms. Kolinda Graba-Kitarovic, Vice President of the Republic of Croatia, my co-moderate. I'm happy to be with you at this very important event. I had the privilege to be personally present during both the events of adaptation of Millennium Declaration in 2000. I was the Prime Minister and I was present there, and the adaptation of SDG in 2015. So SDGs are the expression of people's needs, aspiration, and rights. SDG localization is the process of implementing and monitoring strategies at the very local level, reflecting different challenges and opportunities. Localization transforms global goals into local realities and aspirations. It motivates individuals as well as promotes an integrated, inclusive, and sustainable approaches for implementation. The challenge of taking benefits of the global agenda to the last person at the local level is critical in realizing SDGs. Therefore, in this session, we will hear from you how you managed and plan to adapt your national strategies to take care of the people at the margin of the societies, because each country, they have different condition, economic or environmental or geographical conditions. So each country has its own plan and program, but we can share our experience through it. Dear friends, before we exchange ideas, I would like to share our experience on the localization strategies for the SDGs. Learning from the experience of MDGs at a very early stage, we have integrated the goals of the SDGs into our 7th five-year plan and again incorporating those in our upcoming 8th five-year plan for 2021 to 2025. Because MDG very successfully we have implemented, and SDG which is actually relevant to our condition and the goals which will be beneficiary for our people, we have given more importance to those agenda. We have adopted the whole of society approach in the implementation by involving various stakeholders, in particular those who are at the bottom. We equally have identified respective responsibilities and tasks of government offices. The government officials have been implementing respective action plan in a coordinated manner. We have created innovative monitoring framework and for which we have launched an online SDG tracker to monitor progress in real time. We have also created National Data Coordination Committee to expedite authentic data collection and its utilizations. We are trying to mobilize resources and realize innovative financing involving the private sector and responsive civil society. However, like other developing countries, we need enhanced support from multilateral and bilateral development partners. Excellency, in order to effectively localize SDGs at the district and sub-district level, lowest tier of our administration, we have selected 40 priority indicators. Out of these, 39 indicators are chosen from 17 goals, and the remaining one is chosen by the local administrative unit according to their local realities and importance, following the principle of leaving no one behind. We also included our people's representative in the local tier. Excellencies, localizing SDGs is also empower local stakeholders at all levels. It aims at making sustainable development more responsive and relevant to local needs and aspirations. Meaningful partnership and cooperation are equally essential, both at the local and global level. I would like to request all the global leaders to stick to their commitments that we had made for the planet and our people. I am confident that exchange of ideas would enhance our understanding of the development journey. It will also assist us in replicating the best practices. I am sure that together we can bring benefits of the SDGs to most marginalized people, often at the bottom of the society and economy. I thank you, Excellency.
Thank you very much, Hasima. Distinguished participants, before calling on the first speaker on the list, may I remind delegations that statements are limited to 3 minutes. To assist speakers in managing their time, a speech timer will be projected on the screen. The clock on the speech timer will start blinking red to indicate that the speaker has 1 minute left to conclude his or her statement. In this regard, delegations are encouraged to submit longer versions of their statements to the Secretariat for posting on the PaperSmart portal. I appeal to all delegations to strictly observe the time limits in order to allow all inscribed speakers to deliver their statements. And now I give the floor to His Majesty the King of Eswatini.
Thank you so much, Chairperson, Heads of State and Government, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure for me to share with this august gathering the progress made by the Kingdom of Eswatini on sustainable development goals post the implementation of Millennium Development Goals. My government incorporated SDGs into the National Development Framework in 2014 through the revision of the Vision 2022 and the National Development Plan. This formed the basis for mobilizing resources and budgeting for them. The SDGs were officially launched in June 2016 following a consultative process with all stakeholders such as private sector, NGOs, civil society and development partners, and communities. These discussions out across all the groups of people, inclusive of youth, women, men, people living with disabilities, and the elderly. This led to the domestication of the indicators where the targets were reviewed in the local development context, with our government prioritizing people's livelihoods in line with the SDGs implementation principle of leaving no one behind. Mr. Chairman, the outcome of this process includes the following achieved targets: poverty reduction. The trend indicated a reduction on the overall level of poverty from 69% in 2000 to 58.9 in 2017. We also have a social protection programs in the form of grants for orphaned and vulnerable children, elderly, and people living with disabilities. Ending hunger and achieving food security. We have introduced an input subsidy program for farmers to boost production of stable food, maize feeding program in schools, as well as promoting irrigation and water harvesting. Expectancy has grown to 58 years in ensuring health, lives, and promoting well-being for all. Life expectancy has grown to 58 years in 2017 from 37 years in mid-2000. On HIV/AIDS, with support of development partners, we've rolled out a full program and achieved outreach at 84.7, 87.4, 91.9 respectively on ending AIDS by 2030 as set by the UN. Inclusive and equitable quality education. We introduced free primary education, access to early childhood care and development education, and the literacy rate improved to 95.3% for women and 91.8% for men. The country has made investment into technical and vocational education training, gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. A new law has been enacted to protect women and girls, in particular against domestic violence, climate change. Policies are in place to address issues of disaster and adaptable to the changing environment. Partnerships towards attainment of SDGs. We are working with development partners supporting us in agriculture, water and sanitation, health and infrastructure. Lastly, Mr. Chairman, lastly, Chairman, we are faced with the challenge of limited resources for implementing the goals, and as such, efforts towards resource mobilization are being strengthened to ensure visible change in the development of Eswatini. In this regard, the Kingdom is looking forward to convening a donors conference in the near future with the main objective of resource mobilization for the SDGs, and you are all invited to come and share your expertise with us. I thank you. May Almighty God bless us all.
I thank His Majesty, the King of Eswatini. And I now give the floor to His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Palau.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chairs, Excellencies and colleagues. Thank you for the invitation to address this HLPF's Leaders Dialogue on Localizing the Sustainable Development Goals. The Republic of Palau was very pleased to present our first voluntary national review at this year's high-level political forum for sustainable development, demonstrating our commitment to implementing the 2030 Agenda. The value of the 2030 Agenda lies in recognizing our diverse circumstances for development and yet providing a common framework and ambition to address this. The emphasis of SDG 17 on partnerships as a means to achieving all the other goals also applies to how we have localized the SDGs. Next week, Palau celebrates our 25th independence anniversary. The presentation of our VNR has provided an important moment to reflect on our national journey over the past 25 years. The Progressing with Our Past theme of our VNR reflects the interaction between local traditions and the SDG agenda. I want to share with you 3 reflections on our VNR. Firstly, ownership is necessary to achieve localization. A series of national SDG consultations with local stakeholders across all sectors of society included dialogues with Omkasang, our Disabled People's Forum. The National NGO Association also initiated its own education process and appointed representatives to sit in SDG working groups. These consultations assessed available data and identified local priorities to develop a list of core SDG indicators. In turn, these have begun to be integrated into our government processes. One echo of this process is ownership and localization is that our VNR was co-presented by a member of civil society. But the second reflection is that adapting the SDG framework to our local context still faces structural challenges. In particular, data limitations can undermine the entire mission of SDG implementation. Thus, while we identified 95 SDG targets as the core targets for Palau for our local context, our VNR still found that 16 indicators had insufficient data to properly assess our progress. Implementing the SDGs effectively require an improvement in statistical capacities. Partnerships and support to strengthen statistical offices will be necessary to provide the proper evidence for decision-making and implementation. Finally, localization, like the 2030 Agenda as a whole, is not a task that we undertake alone. Building and deepening partnerships have helped us to make progress in areas such as universal health coverage and marine protection. Partnerships with the United States, Japan, and Taiwan, and civil societies in particular, have been essential to this progress. But the global climate crisis threatens to undermine these achievements, and inadequate means of implementation through the multilateral system threatens to slow our reverse momentum. Greater solidarity with the smallest and most vulnerable is a must. The 2030 Agenda will be a guiding framework for our sustainable development in the next phase of Palau's national journey. But we need a renewed commitment to partnerships, to realize these dreams. This must be the lesson of this high-level dialogue. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Palau, and now give the floor to His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Bhutan.
Your Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a lot of pleasure to talk about SDG because localizing SDG in Bhutan is a pleasure, and it was very easy because decades back, before the onset of SDG, Bhutan had been on the path of gross national happiness. With this, I have my king's greetings to all the participants here. Gross national happiness, my king defines as development with values. Values that will keep you rooted to your traditional norms, values that will keep us loving our mother nature. Based on these values, our constitution mandates that we keep at least 60% of our country under forest cover. And right now we have 72%, and that's why we are carbon negative. Our constitution also demands that we give absolutely free quality health and education to all Bhutanese for all times to come. With this, again, my king clearly says that investment in health and education are the best, efficient social levelers. On this note, last election, 2018, my party campaigned on the vision of narrowing the gap, which exactly goes in line of leaving no one behind in the language of SDGs. A note on educational system in Bhutan is, even though we give free, we really wanted to give more focus on this. And I'm so happy to report here that coming last June, we managed to make teachers in Bhutan the most highly paid profession in the country, almost to the tune of 75%. Thank you. To the tune of 75% more than the rest of the civil servants. With this, I'm very hopeful that it will not only encourage our present teachers, but also draw in more brain into this profession. And through that, I'm very confident that we can leap beyond SDGs. On this note, through voluntary reporting, auditing of the SDGs, they recommended that we must have a parliamentary committee on this. And I'm happy to report again that we managed to make a joint committee on this, composing of upper body, opposition, and government MPs to be monitoring on the developments of SDGs. With this, we also have a dashboard, national dashboard in a Gross National Happiness Commission to monitor on daily basis the progress of SDG. And I'm happy to again report that I chair that Gross National Happiness Commission, and they report to my office on monthly basis. With this, we're very happy that my government has identified 17 national key result areas. These are front-loaded version of SDG that we are targeting to achieve by 2023. With this, I also would like to say that the way we achieved MDG, Bhutan aspires to be one of the early achievers in SDG. For that, I thank all the partners that have been very helpful to us, both bilateral, multilateral partners. And on the way forward, we have identified a lot of very important national flagship programs on digitalizing Bhutan, on organic flagship, on sustainable use of water, and many other activities that we will definitely need help from all our well-meaning partners. On this front of all the SDG goals, SDGs, I would like to request the UN to have a closer look at SDG 17 that is more appropriate for Bhutan as we prepare to graduate from LDC group by 2023. With this, I look forward to working very closely and be again one of the early achievers on SDG. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency the Prime Minister of Bhutan and now give the floor to His Excellency the President of the Republic of Nauru.
Mr. President, Excellencies, and distinguished guests, it is an honor for me to participate in this multi-stakeholder roundtable to share our experiences in localizing the SDGs. The adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development 5 years ago was an important step for us, demonstrating our ability to learn from past experience and create an approach that is better tailored to our needs. Since the adoption of the 2030 Agenda, Nauru has taken important steps at the national level to contextualize this universal agenda, as one size does not fit all. Nauru realizes that the interlinkages and integrated nature of the 2030 Agenda requires a more robust whole-of-government approach. We have integrated relevant international frameworks, including the Samoa Pathway and 2030 Agenda in our National Sustainable Development Strategy, to maximize the synergies between the global agenda and our national plan. To ensure effective planning using a whole-of-government approach, institutional capacity development is needed. It is imperative to break down the siloed approach. In this vein, we have established an interdepartmental committee to allow for the participation of all relevant stakeholders to help drive and also monitor progress towards the transformation needed in our country. We have made significant strides in strengthening our systems to enable the implementation of the SDG goals by strengthening public financial services through introduction of legislation in tax and customs, including the vital provision of banking services after a decade of operating as a cash economy and the establishment of the Intergenerational Trust Fund. These initiatives demonstrate our efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda. We have worked assiduously to fasten our hard-earned development gains. As for my country, the cruel realities of climate change threaten what progress we have achieved. Climate change is the single greatest threat to the livelihoods, security, and well-being of our people. Importantly, the adverse effects of climate change, including the warming of the ocean, can potentially impact our tuna fishery, which is our primary revenue base. As we grapple against these special challenges against us, raising domestic resources is not enough. Grant-based and concessional finances are a vital source of development funding. Moreover, access to finance should not move beyond static measures, but to take into account the special case of SIDS and Vulnerability Index as critical methods. The role of the United Nations Development System is also crucial in our development. This is why we have actively participated in the reposition so that it is better positioned to deliver impactful assistance on the ground. We are heartened that the Secretary General has brought special attention to our sub-region by way of establishing a new MCO in the North Pacific. We believe this has been overdue and is a positive step toward ensuring long-term in-country engagement and durable institutional capacity development. The initiative highlighted here are only a few of our efforts to contextualize the 2030 Agenda. Notwithstanding these, there is a need to further develop institutional capacities and foster a more collaborative spirit in how we do our work. A robust M&E is critical in ensuring we stay true to our commitments. For Nauru, data collection and statistical systems is still a major challenge. The international community must make good on its commitments to support SIDS to strengthen our national statistical offices. Our sustainable development aspirations are not possible without strong partnerships. I would like to thank all our partners who have helped us on this journey to realizing our goals. Nauru will continue in its efforts to implement the 2030 Agenda to achieve better life for all Nauruans. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Nauru, and I would now like to invite my co-moderator, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, to continue the proceedings of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I invite representative from Samoa, His Excellency Tulipa Saili is the Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade of the independent state of Samoa. The Prime Minister of Samoa.
Distinguished co-moderators, heads of state and government, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Integrating the Sustainable Development Goals into our national development strategy, namely Strategy for the Development of Samoa, ensures that the implementation is aptly contextualized and is part and parcel of our overall national planning and budgeting processes. Samoa, in line with the implementation of its National Sustainable Development Strategy, is taking the same sector-wide approach to implement the SDGs. Since our first voluntary national review in 2016, aligning the 17 SDGs with our development strategy and the 14 sector plans allowed us to link SDG implementation to the existing monitoring and evaluation frameworks, and more importantly, to the key development financing and projects for each sector and SDG. All aid is on budget. All goals have been allocated for implementation by sector. Therefore, for every financial year, our national budget reflects the projects and total resource allocation to be utilized for each sector. Thus, the same financing and partnerships can therefore be linked to relevant SDGs. The same process is applied to our implementation efforts for other regional and interregional or international commitments, including the Paris Agreement, Samoa Pathway, the Pacific Framework for Regionalism, and the Human Rights, Disarmament, and Environmental Conventions. These efforts are to ensure that we allow for more efficient allocation of the limited resources available and more effective aid coordination to respond to Samoa's sustainable development priorities and international obligations. Samoa engages with all stakeholders, including parliamentarians, youth and civil society, through seminars and school forums. We utilize the outreach opportunities provided by existing programs and sector plans to deliver on messages and localization of the SDGs. Inclusiveness ensures that expectations are managed and more meaningful engagement is encouraged. Excellencies, despite our best efforts, significant statistical capacity gaps still remain, particularly analytical capacity, given the integrated nature and the indivisibility of the goals. We are vigilant to ensure compliance across sectors and to address any disconnect between budgeting and planning processes, particularly for sector plans involving more than one lead ministry or SDG. The demands also from regional and international organizations for reports or data based on specific SDGs targets and or indicators outside dedicated national reporting periods is adding to the burden of our already stretched capacity. Lastly, and more importantly, the adverse impacts of climate change and our vulnerability to natural disasters remain key challenges to our efforts. In order to respond to these challenges and to accelerate progress, Samoa builds on synergies and addresses the gaps through effective and efficient use of existing resources. Looking at support and investing in human and institutional capacities, particularly analytical capacities, our statistical needs and better prioritization are key. Mobilizing and engaging all stakeholders will be critical. Finally, we need to look at a people-centered approach. This is why we have committed to ensure a human rights approach to the SDGs with the important focus on inclusiveness and securing citizens' rights to development. Only then can we uphold the promise of the SDGs of leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I invite Mr. Asim Strainer, Administrator, United Nations Development Program. Pakistan has come.
Distinguished co-moderators, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to address you, and I do so on behalf of the UN system. As speaking time is short, and as you can imagine, with so many agencies, funds, and programs wishing to share with you their engagement on the localization of SDGs, I think the simplest way I could say to you what I've been asked to convey to you is that in the context of SDGs and in partnership with so many of you, analogous to Toys R Us, the UN system of agencies, funds, and programs, in a sense, is localization R Us, because in the many examples that were shared with me and also that came into the statement, our current engagement across the world through the many different entities not only ranges across the different sectors and levels of government, from national to subnational to local government, but also across a whole range of sectors. And so localization is in many respects an agenda that every single UN agency at the moment is trying to address. From the hamlets to the metropolis, from blossoming economies to crisis settings, local governments are often the first responders and represent enduring and responsive institutions to which people can turn for predictable support and certainly more accessible support. Mayors and governors are embracing the SDGs as the way to articulate integrated policies by mobilizing businesses and civil society, because the participation of all stakeholders is crucial, and the more local it gets, the more real it gets, perhaps sometimes also the more manageable it gets. And while I could read out many of the different examples that we as a UN family are proud to bring to national development processes, let me just for a moment also remind you how much we have learned over the last few years when voluntary national reviews were presented here in New York. I certainly have studied them very carefully, and also with my dear colleague Lu Zhenmin, in terms of the overall reporting. What we see is an extraordinary engagement in terms of localization of SDGs. Whether it was in Mexico going to the subnational level, whether it is in India where with data and Niti Aayog and other planning competencies, we are now looking at combining all the data sets that are available for national and local planning from many different levels of government into literally being able to look at one village through multiple different data sets. Whether it is the governor of Kanagawa Prefecture in Japan who has taken the SDGs as a way of empowering local citizen engagement, and I could go on with many other examples from across the world. Localization is the key to SDG implementation. Our work as UN agencies remains principally to help national governments to frame the conditions, but what I can say to you with full confidence, we have learned a great deal from the way you as member states have set about implementing this and going local. And I remember in particular also the governor of Medellin having provided us with a wonderful example of what it means to have the SDGs available at the local level. Fascinating stories, great prospects, and on behalf of the UN family, we remain fully committed in supporting you on this pathway. Thank you.
I thank the Administrator of the United Nations Development Program for his statement. I now give the floor to Ms. Gabriela Kivas Baron, President of the Interparliamentary Union.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen. I prefer to speak in my mother tongue, so I will be speaking Spanish.
The parliamentarians are key players in implementing the development agenda. Achieving those goals, therefore, should include all voices, those of governments, local governments, parliaments, civil society, the private sector, to everybody, so that we can transform this planet in a little over 10 years. What's important is that we as parliamentarians have very specific tasks, and if we were not to be included, it means that, well, we wouldn't achieve those goals. So the parliamentarians' task in the area of sustainable development is very important. It is up to us to work on new legislation. It's important to ensure that in all laws there should be no exclusion. There are laws throughout the world which are excluding many vulnerable groups. There are still laws which systematically exclude women, and there are laws which exclude young people from democratic participation. Secondly, this review of our legislation should ensure that all possibilities are available to ensure that human rights can be enjoyed through public policies, and I insist that we must not leave anyone behind. Also, we have this task of budgeting. I'm from Mexico, and in my country, that we say that real love is shown through the budget. If the development priorities are not included in a country's budget, then they are clearly not priorities for that country's government. Secondly, we have the oversight role, and it's important also to be representative. We can't talk about democratic models nor about inclusive development if only 1 out of every 4 parliamentarians is a woman. We cannot talk about an inclusive democracy if half of the planet who are under 30, but only 2.2% of the parliamentarians throughout the world belong to this group of young people. So in each of our countries, we must work on laws to ensure the full involvement of women and young people. It's not enough to have conferences on young people here if they are not allowed to be part of the decision-making process in our own countries. Furthermore, I must say that the Interparliamentary Union is undertaking very important work in this regard. Beyond working with parliamentarians in all of these areas, we are also reviewing how we can implement in a systematic way, in a step-by-step way, in each of the regions where the parliamentarians are representing, so that this sustainable development become a reality. We have specialized workshops, regional seminars, and we work with the United Nations in various areas to ensure that parliamentarians ensure that these global agreements become a reality at the national level and become a reality for the people we represent. Thank you very much. I hope that in the statement to be issued, if it could include reference to parliamentarians. Thank you very much.
I thanks to the President of the Interparliamentary Union for her statement, and we fully agree that Parliament is very important. Yes, thank you. I now give the floor to Ms. Tri Rizmaharini, Mayor of Surabaya, Indonesia.
Excellency, distinguished delegates, Surabaya is always direct the city development using SDGs in every aspect. And the heart of our development is kampung, or urban village, because they comprise 60% of our total area. The city government improved the living infrastructure and sanitation quality in kampungs, including implemented slum upgrading kampungs program and improvement of public retreats. Residents are implementing 3R programs to manage both solids and wastewater. It's helped saving up 20% of water use per month, while the clean water supply in the city has reached 98% coverage. Local economic empowerment is performed by inviting women, especially from poor families, to be entrepreneurs through the Economic Heroes program, while dropout students are joining Young Warriors program to enable them starting a business. Co-working space is established for the startup together with public service mall. Inclusion schools are available for children with special needs, in addition to social shelters for street children and poor disabled children. To ensure adequate education, more than 1,600 scholarships are provided for the poor students. In Surabaya, we built more than 1,500 public libraries located not only in the city centers, but also spread in kampungs, especially in densely populated areas. Other public and social facilities are provided for free, including 49 broadband learning centers, more than 475 public parks, 524 sport fields, free mathematics and language learning center, as well as community health. In this public space, trainers are available to teach children dancing, playing music, or even martial arts. Close to kampung, we built 46 vendor centers, traditional and cheap markets, as well as grocery stores. To support good health and well-being, we have sports available not only for toddlers, but also for teenagers and senior citizens. Free medical checkup, free immunization, and morning exercise are organized regularly. In addition to free meals for 36,000 senior citizens, orphans, and disabled people. Facilities such as free ambulance and hearse are available 24/7 days, while we also have 112 emergency number to respond to any public complaints, from emergency issue to psychological consultation. As many as 3,500 free internet connections are provided for community leaders to each resident accessing any public services. The increasing number of population bring a challenge the provision of adequate housing. In this respect, we are assisted by central government to provide low-cost rental flats with rental fee of minimum $10 per month for the low-income people. We also prioritize disaster risk management, as Surabaya is located only 5 meters above sea level, 72 reservoirs for 46 hectare urban forest and 2,800 more hectare mangrove forests in its coastal area are built. We implement waste to energy and disposal site and are gradually shifting to the use of alternative energy such as solar cell, biogas, and windmill. For public services, Surabaya implement e-government using online and electronic system to foster good governance. To encourage people safe from private to public transport, we launched Surabaya Bus, a city bus that only allows passengers paying the fare using plastic bottle. As a result, we can today witness a significant decrease of loaded area from 60% to only less than 2%, lower of temperature up to degrees Celsius, decreasing rate of disease, better air quality index, while enjoying highest index of property price compared to other big cities in Indonesia, increasing number of high purchasing power society from only 30% in 2010 to more than 47% in 2017. Increasing number of tourists visit from the 15 million people in 2015 to more than 27 million people in 2018, reducing poverty rate, economic growth that is above the national level, as well as a highest human development index in Indonesia. Thank you.
I thank the Mayor of Surabaya, Indonesia, for her statement. We have heard the last speaker in Leaders' Dialogue for or localizing the Sustainable Development Goals. I would like to thank all participants for their focused, result-oriented, and forward-looking intervention. Is there any time? Can I speak? Yes. Okay. At this dialogue, we have learned how local governments and municipalities work closely with our citizens in support of the 2030 agenda. Local governments and municipalities often manage first-hand. They are also key providers of health service, education, employment, social service, particularly in times of crisis. Also public health and also sanitation, pure water supply, everything belongs to the local government. And they protect our natural environment in a nutshell. Local governments are the frontline implementers of the SDGs. Our discussion has shown that achieving the 2030 agenda requires empowerment of local actors to bring about the benefits of the SDGs to people. This way, they help us to deliver policy coherence, good practices, and experience-driven solutions. Through them, we build resilient and strong communities in our societies. By working with the grassroots, we can bring innovation and positive change. Local authorities make the big goals and targets of the 2030 agenda meaningful to people. Therefore, key to achieving the 2030 agenda lies in our capacity to create conditions for local leaders to bring effective results. We also heard firsthand experiences that illustrate the critical role that Parliament can play in internalizing the SDGs for a national and local agenda for action. Let us work together to enable local authorities most productive way in the spirit of genuine cooperation of realizing Agenda 2030. In Bangladesh, we have achieved GDP 8.13%. Our poverty, it was 41%, now we reduced to 21% within 1 decade. Our literacy rate was only 48%, now it is gone up to 73%. Life expectancy was 56 years, now it is 72.5 years we have achieved. So if we work together, it is achievable, what I believe. Now I give the floor to my fellow co-moderator, Colinda, for concluding remarks.
Thank you, Hasima. Thank you very much to all of you delegates for participating in today's discussion. We've heard some excellent ideas and very good examples on localizing the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm certain that the distinguished leaders and delegates will take many of them and implement them at home. We have thus concluded Leaders Dialogue 4. Leaders Dialogue 5 on Partnership for Sustainable Development will be held this afternoon at 3 p.m. in this chamber. The meeting is adjourned.